All right, so welcome this morning to the Invista channel. Here on the YouTube Invista channel, we're going to talk a little bit about end-to-end supply chain and how that connects to your automation strategies. And I'm Nate Rozier, been with Invista about 10 years, and I've put together supply chain and corporate strategies for about 400 companies now. I'm not bored with it, but I've seen some patterns that kind of reoccur. We're going to talk about some stuff around end-to-end, how to think about it. And end-to-end is interesting. It's kind of a buzzword, right? And it's similar to blockchain and AI and all these things that could mean a lot or not much, right? What does it really mean? But end-to-end is really a mindset. It's really a concept. I'll tell you, when I help companies with high-level corporate strategy, it's usually one of the top 5 or 6 corporate strategies you would have is to build end-to-end framework to making decisions and running operations. And I want to talk a little about that and why it's important and how it connects to your automation strategies, okay? So it's kind of a lot to go through. We'll have some questions at the end. So we're going to talk a little bit about why and how to think about it, and then we'll talk a little bit more about how we get into the details of executing end-to-end in your automation and systems, okay? Now we have 45 minutes, and this could be a full semester, so I'm going to go as quickly as I can, all right? So, all right, one of the things to kind of think about is the way the customers operate. I think the complexity of creating the right kind of customer experience is completely overlooked. If you want to find a big mess, right? If you want to see a big mess, take a look at your average retail technology stack, right? They got a mix of legacy systems, old systems. I always joke Excel, right? Runs most companies in the world, and but the customer expectations change a lot, and they're extremely demanding, right? They want a lot of SKUs available tomorrow, and they want to have complete transparency of the orders. They want high quality products. I mean, like, this is the golden age of consumer products. It's what it is. Almost every category has got products for every possible niche, manufactured in any country you want, for the most part. And so, based on that, the customers are very demanding. And at the end of the day, what's interesting is e-commerce changes a lot of patterns. So that's one of the things I think is completely overlooked. Is that I noticed this because I used to run a company called Dina DeLuca, and we had 5 channels, right? We had stores, we had catalogs, we had e-commerce, and I noticed that if I looked at it, the e-commerce seasonality was much higher than everything else. I called it spikier. That's my name. I made it up, trademarked, so you can't use it. But basically, what we would find is the seasonal peaks would get higher and higher, and they all interacted, right? Sometimes it would drive the retail up as well. So you kind of see not just more SKUs out there and more demanding customers wanting those SKUs, but it was also driving my seasonal peaks up and down quite a bit. The other thing that's important from customer expectations is really transparency. It doesn't matter if you sell to businesses or you sell to customers, they want a lot more information. We used to, and you'll see this a lot of times, if you buy food products, a lot of times they'll tell you what farm it came from, right? And they track that data all the way through from the processing and distribution and retail. So it's an interesting way to kind of think about business, how much it all works together. And you can imagine, right, in order to make this work, you have to have a relatively flexible architecture and supply chain, and you have to have a lot of data, and you have to have a good data architecture. And that's kind of what we're going to talk about, is how do I get the right information in the right place at the right time? If you're trying to get the right inventory at the right place at the right time, which is how most of us make money, then you got to have the right data at the right place at the right time. And that's an important piece. And if you think about your automation is kind of a subset processing that data. And so, getting good data on demand and forecast is really critical to making good decisions and positioning, but also creating that architecture to say, okay, well, where am I going to put what information and how am I going to provide that to both the folks serving the customer and my customer? And so if you think about end-to-end, it's really a lot of times about the system and data architecture. Now, it sounds really nerdy, like, okay, we'll get into the systems and master data, Nobody likes to talk about that. But it's not that hard, okay? It's possible, trust me. I have large clients that never sunsetted a SKU, they would reuse them, right? And so if you don't know what that means, that basically means that they would have a SKU number that could mean 5 different products. And they figured out how to fix it. And they fixed it in 6 months, okay? And they did 1 million transactions a day. If they can fix it, you all can fix your data problems. And you can build a good architecture, okay? So part of the end-to-end, obviously, is the change of cost and demand. All of us, it looks like all of you are old enough to have survived COVID. So you've seen a lot, right? You have too much labor, not enough labor, too much freight, not enough freight. I can't get containers, like you've seen it all, right? So now at this point, you're kind of like, okay, well, I got to have plan A, plan B, plan C. I come from a military background. Look, you always have a plan A, plan B, plan C. If you import products and you don't have a multi-port strategy, you're wrong, okay? Get that fixed. If you have a primary carrier, and that's great, everybody does, okay, what's your backup? What's B, what's C? And how am I going to manage that? Because things change so frequently that it's difficult to really plan on a static product flow and supply chain. So you always want to build that in. Cost. If you manage a supply chain, this is what your execs talk to you about, right? Either the only thing they complain about is the customer didn't get it, or costs. And so one of the things that's always important is transportation is a massive factor. But transportation is a cost where you can negotiate and you can work on get better SLAs and cost per mile. But at the end of the day, the way that your supply chain is laid out and the expectations that your customer have are really driving those transportation costs, right? And there are ways you can. If you think about the role of automation could, at a lower cost, push inventory closer, which reduces your transportation costs. So we do see a lot of that now with clients figuring out how to push inventory closer to the customer using automation to reduce that fixed and variable costs, right? And I'll talk a little bit more about that. And shipping cost trends. You all have lived through this, so you know what it is. The other thing that we see. If you think about it, right, the SKU proliferation, a lot of my clients, they were designed to sell, auto parts retailer. Their stores carry about 15,000 SKUs. They sell across their chain 250,000 SKUs, a little more than 15,000, right? Well, how do they want all those 250,000 to be able to get to you next day or same day. Well, how does that work? Well, it's not a simple solution. You have to sort of design a supply chain that operates that way. And guess what? You got to be able to manage it, right? Which is the other challenge, in a way that that they can become profitable. And so they have to build sort of a little more elegant solution. And again, it gets down to the system architecture, how they look at their business and how they want to serve their customer. And what they do really well, and the best clients I work with, some of the best companies in the world, they think about the customer first. What is the customer experience I want to have? And then you design the rest of the supply chain, their sourcing, procurement, systems to support that. They start there. So if you're ever interested in corporate strategy, I just gave you 2 hints. Customer, what's the customer experience, right? And end-to-end. Those are 2 great ways to think about the corporate strategy. And if you work in supply chain, those are 2 of your key strategies you want to kind of build on to build out a supply chain. Some concepts out there. There are a lot of concepts out there, but supply chain 4.0. So it's not a new concept, but basically you create an agile supply chain because supply and demand is more dynamic than it has been, right? If you think about it, we actually had about 15, 20 years of relatively static. You knew where you're going to place it. You could use the same factories, go through the same ports, use the same carriers. The costs are relatively stable. That's actually not historically common, right? Now we're in a place of where it's a little more unstable, right? You're not really sure. You may change your sourcing. Maybe the shipping schedules have changed quite a bit. The costs are going up and down. Labor's not as available to do work. So you got to be able to react to that. So if you think about it, there's another key concept on end-to-end that's very important. It's time. Now, I'm in a hurry. I drive Ducati motorcycles, which are kind of fast because I'm in a hurry. And time is important to me. I'm one of those people that, if I have a commute, if I can shave 30 seconds off my commute, I consider that a win, right? So you need to be thinking the same way, which is, hey, look, I don't really measure time. If you think about how you're measuring your supply chain and your warehousing, you normally measure cost, you measure service, you measure fill rates. You need to think about time. Time is money. And if I can compress the time by the time I get a forecast, to the time I get something to the customer, I'm more accurate. What happens if I'm more accurate? Well, I cut my costs all the way across the board, right? I get the right inventory at the right place at the right time. I'm able to make better decisions. If something happens, I can react to that. But if I have to place an order 12 months out for product, I mean, I have a client I worked with. They did that. They placed an order. It's very common. I placed an order 12 months out from forecast. The forecast actually 12 months out was 40%. Do you think they had inventory issues? Absolutely. Do you think they air freighted a lot of stuff? Absolutely. Right. So what if they cut it to 6 months? What is that? Well, then it was a lot of money, right? And so, but to cut time is relatively complicated because that includes I got to cut my processing time in the warehouse. I got to the way I tender my trucks, right? There's a lot of time involved in that. Consolidation centers, deconsolidation centers, which factories I use, which countries I source from, all those things are affected by that. But that's something you want to keep track of. Big hint, right? Make sure you track of it. It's a big concept around end-to-end is first, compress the time cycles. The second one is have a good data architecture and visibility so you can change, right? Things change. Now, if I have a long cycle time and a very complex supply chain, I can't adapt, right? I can't adapt. It's really hard because you're just trying to get stuff to the customer. If I can simplify that, compress my cycle time, and have good visibility, I can adapt. And that's really the big concept around it. They got autonomous truck. I mean, you can take it to the next level, but I think those are the key things that you want to take away from there. So let's talk about planning a product flow as a key part of the end-to-end. So one of the things that we think about on product flow is how do we build the right type of product flow and inventory strategies to get the right product, the right place, at the right time. So not very easy to do, right? If you all have done that before, it's very complicated. So one of the things that's very important is how do I make sure I've got the right forecast and how do I adapt to it? So at the end of the day, right, I was in the Army. And it's a well-known fact that every plan is obsolete after the first shot is fired. And that's 100% what happens, right? I make a plan. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to build this stuff for the peak season. And then there's a port strike or a typhoon, volcanoes. Like, I've seen it all now, I think. Suez gets blocked. Doesn't matter what it is. Or maybe there's really bad weather and it kills your demand in a certain region. So how do I make sure I'm able to adapt to those types of things? And there are a lot of tricks to this. And we'll talk about some of those. So another thing I find through my consulting experience is I love to look at inventory. It's kind of rare. I used to do turnarounds, as a C-level guy, and first thing I look at is inventory. Most people look at sales and customers. I'll look at inventory because inventory is a repository of all the bad decisions in a company. It's true. It's like a forensics thing. It's like, why is that there? Well, we had this marketing thing that didn't work. Well, why is that there? Well, we had a big return because this thing had a quality. I was like, well, why is that? And you can find all that stuff, and it's hidden. It's like that closet, right, downstairs in the basement you just keep throwing stuff into. You want to take a look at the inventory. So if you build really good inventory performance, it's created by good decisions, right? Good decision making. So when you think about how you want to sort of manage your business, you're really balancing a lot of pieces to make sure I got the inventory to the right place at the right time. And you want to kind of you want to deep dive into why do I have a problem? Most executives want to ignore the bad inventory and just wait till the last minute to write it down. Do not do that. In the end-to-end concept, you get very aggressive with it. You want to get very aggressive and try to figure out how do I make that inventory productive? And if I made this bad decision, what happened? how do I make that better, right? So you have to be very aggressive. So one thing that's extremely important is the concept of customer experience. What experience do you want to create for your customers? And it doesn't matter where you work inside of a company, you affect the customer experience. You work in AR, you actually work in customer experience. If you work in transportation, you obviously work on that. If you work in the warehouse, there's a lot of ways you affect the customer experience. But define that definition of customer experience is how you're going to make decisions on the end-to-end. And you're going to layer that in with the demand patterns. So what's very important is, okay, the customers tell you what they want, you build the experience, and then you see the data around, okay, how do they actually behave? So a lot of really cool things about demand patterns. I study them a lot. Again, I'm nerdy. And what do you sell? When do you sell it? How does that work? But what's important is you kind of take a look at that and you build the patterns against it. Here's how it works. I've had a lot of clients who do what I call demand chasing. They'll build up inventory, and there's a big spike, and then they run their inventory all the way down, and they're like, oh crap, now we got to run overtime to kind of catch up. Guess what? Those demand spikes happen the same time every year. And I was like, well, what if we built inventory a couple weeks ahead of that and had that so we could build it up? And you can come up with concepts to kind of game it, because there are patterns that happen, and you have to follow those patterns. Some companies or people that work in those companies are really good at this, and some of them are trying to figure it out, but you have to kind of look at the patterns and figure out how I'm going to hedge my bets. So it's important to kind of dig into all that. And when you do, you're going to find out where can I be accurate and when am I going to be inaccurate. You're not going to be accurate on every SKU on your forecast and planning. It's not going to happen, right? So the things that you are inaccurate on, you got to have a plan. Like, you can't just stop selling it. You got to say, what's my plan? I have had clients with 40% average inventory forecast accuracy. And yes, I have had a client with zero correlation between forecast and demand. So they set the record, but luckily they're a European company. So when we think about demand patterns, one of the things we're looking at is what is the volume of that demand and how consistent is it? The more consistent demand, the more easier it is to predict. So what's interesting is every company has what I call the tornado, whereas in the bottom right, you got very consistent stuff. It's like bottled water and grocery. You sell the same amount pretty much every day, okay? Do you even have to plan and forecast it? No. Do you even have to store it in your warehouse? No, you do not. I can just bring it in, cross-dock it, ship it out. Why touch it? Why even plan it? I don't have to worry about it. It's a pipe. Then you get stuff in the upper left. Guess what? There's a certain amount of variability. Planning and forecasting systems, they don't help you. They're not going to help. They only handle so much variability. And if you have low volume, high variability, they get confused very easily, and they'll give you misleading stuff. A lot of times in those items, you just want to buy in and sell through. Try to sell them out, right? Maybe they're seasonal. Maybe they're frozen turkeys, right? Maybe there's a lot of things that kind of fit in that category. But in those, a lot of times, you have to have a different strategy as well. And you got to be careful where you deploy them. It's a lot of inventory risk, right? And then you got the stuff in the middle. And that's the stuff where you can normally plan and forecast reasonably. You're going to store in the warehouse in different positions. And you got to think about how far forward I'm going to position my inventory in my network. Do I want to put it in every store? Do I want to push it in every DC? Do I want to hold some back? If it's imported product, you have to think about the farther from the source, the more risk I have, right? So as soon as it hits the port and you move it from that port, you spent money and you touched it. And you only want to touch it once. So how many times do I want to touch this and push this thing forward before I've got a lot of risk and now I'm not selling, I got to transfer it somewhere else or whatever happens. So you got to think about your the product flow. A concept that we kind of leverage quite a bit is multi-echelon inventory optimization. So the key concept here is, we see this a lot on retail and also manufacturing. It's a concept we use quite a bit, which is, hey, look, you've got things that are forward, like you may have a smaller store, and then farther back maybe you have a hub store. It's got more SKUs in it that may replenish. You got forward distribution. You got centralized distribution. You got the port, which might be an import center. You got consolidation centers, right? You actually have multiple echelons in your supply chain. Trying to position inventory so you got the right place at the right time is complicated for systems. So if you're in that scenario and you want to do that, and if you have a lot of SKUs, you need to do a multi-echelon. It's just the way it is. You need a system that can kind of handle that. So basically what it's doing is it's taking a look at the demand patterns and it aggregates it upstream. So a lot of times, let's say I've got 5 stores and I sell 1 per store. It's not a lot of volume, that's variable. If I aggregate upstream to maybe the DC, well, that's 5. Okay, that's better, right? So I can maybe push it there and then only send product forward, and that's an echelon up. Or maybe I'm even selling less than that, and the upstream DC, maybe at the port, is where I kind of hold my safety stock back there because I can aggregate inventory to a more predictable demand. That sounds simple. It's very complicated for a system to do, so that's something you always want to look at from a system planning. It's a key concept around end-to-end. And then what you do is you can take a look at, your demand versus volatility, and then take a look at how you want to kind of leverage that safety stock, how far forward you want to position it versus how far back you want to keep things. So if you think about it, the stuff that, again, it's on the bottom right is far more easily managed and predictable. And so that stuff you push forward, touch it as little as possible, get it where it needs to go. The stuff that gets farther up on the left, you kind of want to hold back, more centralize that, and you want to kind of position it from that perspective. And a seasonal product is a layer of complexity in here. That stuff in the upper left, if there's any seasonality to it, I always say, hey, look, break it up into waves, because as you go through the season, the demand patterns start changing. You want to move that stuff around. So it's an important concept to think about how, when I centralize, how do I leverage that seasonally, okay? And then think about how that affects your overall network, where you're going to position stuff, and then kind of taking a look at how I want to build those multi-echelons inside of my network helps you think about your transportation strategy. What's my plan A, my plan B, which ports am I going to use? Most of my clients of any size are doing East Coast, West Coast, right? Everybody's kind of diversifying their port strategies. And for the most part, it works really well. So what does this mean for automation? It's an important concept, right? One of the things to consider is, remember we mentioned time is very important. So one of the, if you think about it, there's a lot of volatility in demand, there's a lot of volatility in supply, right? And ports and processing. You want to kind of minimize the volatility of your warehouse operations. You want to cut that down as much as you can. So what's important is to kind of consider, well, how do I create some efficiency? And warehouses are deceptively complex. They look simple, but they're really not that simple because you have a lot of things going on and lots of points that can create cycle time issues, bottlenecks, challenges, dock to stock, how do you speed that up? And if you think about it, one of the things you want to do is kind of go through there and say, well, what are my trade-offs, and where do I have opportunities to both reduce time, improve my processing, but also compress the entire cycle time. I want to move stuff as fast as I can through that DC. So one of the things you always want to think about is how much stuff should even go through the DC, and also how many things do I just want to cross-dock? Just trying to get speed, right? I always think about it as a mixing machine. How fast can I spit stuff out, right? Pour it in the top and just have it spit it out the bottom. And I want to have that dock to suck the warehouse dry as fast as I can. That's kind of the thing to think about. So you kind of want to take a look at all the areas and opportunities that you have. And the other thing you want to think about, remember that demand pattern chart I showed you and how that affects your supply chain? It's the same thing in the warehouse. The warehouse is just a microcosm of your supply chain. So you want to think about your slotting, which is going to be relatively dynamic in some ways, and how you want to change that and drive your warehouse operations. Everybody's got seasonality issues inside of warehouses because that's just the way reality is. But you want to think about your warehouse as if this is a dock, this is my mental concept. This is the dock. I want a big vacuum to suck everything out of the dock, right? And I want everything to flow to that dock almost perfectly so it lands, so I have a consistent flow that moves through. So what you have to do is kind of work your way backward and find out what bottlenecks you have in the system that keeps that from a consistent, easy flow. Now, I know a lot of times you think about automation, you're thinking about, well, how in the picking operation I have 40 people and I want to take it to 20 people and I get, all right, that's great. Okay, that's not a bad concept. You really want to save money? Send the entire warehouse home 2 hours early. That's how you save money, right? I played this game, run a lot of warehouses. The quickest thing to do, one of the best ways to run a warehouse is have a shift that ends at 5. And if you have a lot of parents in there, say, hey, look, you want to go home at 3? They all want to go home at 3, pick up the kids at school. So let's get everybody focused on how fast we can get home, right? And in the shift. And so from that processing, you can kind of take a look at. You need to really take a look at slotting, because slotting again it's just a microcosm of the entire network inside of your demand. The other thing that's important for our automation is. So there's a lot of seasonality. I used to run a seasonal business, and one of the interesting challenges about running a seasonal business is, you got temp labor, and there's a lot of turnover in warehouses, right? So your automation needs to simplify the work structure. So if you think about technology in a warehouse, it does two things. What it does is it takes a lot of the middle skilled jobs and eliminates those, and if it done correctly, and then I've got a lot of lower skill jobs where I can use temps or whatever, and then I got some higher skill jobs to kind of manage the automation. And it takes a lot of that middle layer out, which is good because that's a lot of turnover in those particular areas. But you want to make sure you've got good incentives and structures. I've used lots of incentive. You don't need a full labor management to have an incentive program in your warehouse. Please incent your employees. I like team-based incentives. It's worked 100% of the time for me. I even use it in consulting. It works 100% of the time. Again, everybody likes to go home early, and they like to win. So those are important things to consider, because when you tie in the automation, it'll help them achieve those things, and it gets better buy-in with the associates. So when you think about automation, one of the key things we're trying to do on the end-to-end, right? Higher quality, predictable, which often means less dependent on labor, and then processing speed. So, when you think about it, we do a lot of network designs and design supply chains. Where do you want to put a warehouse? And the question normally isn't, where are my transportation costs the best? It's, where can I hire people to work in a warehouse? Big issue. If y'all run warehouses, you know what I'm talking about. So you really kind of want to take a look at, okay, what kind of people are there that we can hire to bring in, and then what is that trend over time? Because the trend's not going to go up, right? It's going to be fewer and fewer people available, which means the automation ROI is going to get better and better over time. So you always want to kind of think about, at some point you will automate parts of your warehouse, and when would that be appropriate? And when you design new locations, take a look at that labor availability and when that automation makes more sense, right? So we see a lot of pieces of automation which are fantastic. I think, travel time in a warehouse is wasted time, right? It's cycle time issues. We all worked and seen warehouses where, the order is waiting for one item that's hard to pick, that's way in the back, and they're picking in the air, like, just think if you didn't have that problem. That's a perfect automation opportunity. The people picking in the air and not narrow aisle, you automate that, you're going to speed up that entire warehouse, because I guarantee you there are people waiting. That's one of the key things that you always want to take a look at is, where are people waiting? Is it in packaging, fulfillment, picking, waiting on replenishment? Where are they waiting? And then, are there ways we can automate things that would speed the entire machine up? That's really what you do. You want to speed up the whole warehouse, not just cut a couple heads here and there. Speed up the entire warehouse. There are a lot of things that work really well. I think the goods to person has definitely got some killer ROI. And we definitely see some technology that's great for both replenishment and all kinds of processing. So when you think about automation and where you want to leverage it, You can kind of, you walk around here, right? There's all kinds of, 5 years ago, you saw a few of these, and now everybody's got robots and all kinds of stuff bouncing around, which just makes the show much more entertaining, to be honest with you. And I feel like I want to ride on some of those. But I think what you want to consider is there's not one piece of automation that fixes the whole warehouse, right? It's a puzzle, and you got to figure out what pieces of the puzzle make sense, and you don't have to put all the pieces together at the same time. In fact, I kind of recommend you don't. It's pretty overwhelming. Unless you're doing a lights out warehouse, you may want to put, start out with a level A of automation, and then add, goods to person's fantastic. A lot of times you can put a shuttle in here, and then you can add another shuttle over time, and maybe have a pick mod, start rolling that over to more automation, and then do some replenishment automation. You can add some over time, but you have to be intentional. You have to build design a plan against it, knowing that labor is going to be more of a challenge in the future. We tend to do a lot of automation assessments to basically take a look at what would make sense for your warehouse, how that would operate. There are always quantitative and qualitative factors. Please do not overlook the qualitative factors. Again, if I hire a lot of temps, automation is really nice because it's a lot easier for them. And also I need fewer temps. So that'll improve my service level, cycle, improves pretty much everything across the board. When you get into some of the details, there's a lot of different pieces of automation. And most of the designs we do now, we do a couple hundred facility designs a year. And when we look at them, they're different combinations of automation that only make sense. I will tell you that, there's a risk that, I say a risk, it's a tendency for you to say, well, his company looks like us, so what we'll do is we'll automate like them. No. I will tell you, I have clients that you would swear are the exact same business. It doesn't matter what it is. They're in the exact same industry. They have similar customers, completely different. The warehouses are completely different. You can't just copy it. You got to find out what works for you and how that's going to build. Companies are much more unique than you would think. So just keep in mind, you kind of have to do your diligence and figure out how the puzzle will work for you. The other thing that you really need, and this is a huge end-to-end concept, you need a good data architecture, and you need to have a good systems components. I have the warning I always provide my clients is do not put a racing engine, a supercharged racing engine, in your 30-year-old minivan. You're not going to go much faster. You will crash faster, but you're not going much faster, okay? You got to make sure that, some of these goods to person system, they run 10, 20 times faster than you could do manually. And that's great, which means I can create a bottleneck even faster, right? I can pile stuff up on the dock. I've seen it happen. It's not our client, but I've seen it happen, okay? So you had to kind of think about, well, what do I need to make all this work? It's not as complicated as it sounds. Again, the end-to-end is a mental concept. How do I think from the customer experience all the way through so it makes sense, right? And I think about how I'm going to plan, forecast, position everything. I really need to make sure I have a good architecture under that. So interestingly, I had a client up in Canada. We have a lot of Canadian clients, and they're a lot of fun. But they had this particular problem. They said, Nate, we're trying to get product, mostly fashion product from France and Italy, to our customers as fast as we can, and it's taken a long time. We think the problem is maybe the processing time in the warehouse, or maybe it's the freight out of Europe is bottlenecked. And we dug into it, and we found out they could cut the entire time from source to customer in half if they had the right data architecture and the right data in the right place at the right time. That was it. That happens all the time. You could really speed things up. I mean, if I could receive the product, do exactly what it was, and have the EDI so that I could do the automated transaction, put it away, I could get it out the door next day. Easy, right? And then ship it directly to the customer. If I have good information about the customer, I know how fast I could get it to them. I could speed things up really fast. What we find is that as you go through all those nodes from the source all the way through, that everybody's trying to figure out what this is, where it's going, make sure we put it in the right place, what's the expiration date, whatever it is, right? And so you really kind of want to make sure you've got a good backbone behind it because, again, if you think about all the way from the plan and forecast all the way down to how you do the fulfillment, you want to have a seamless transaction, right? And so it sounds It sounds really hard. It's not as hard as it sounds. I have a lot of clients who've done this. You just have to sort of intentionally design that piece. You don't have to put in a full ERP system to make it work. You don't have to do that, right? You can use an old legacy I-series and you can build the right data architecture. I've seen it done. So you want to kind of consider that. When you take a look at your system stack, you kind of take a look at the top there, you know, the data management, the information that you have, how you use that information, how that's processed and held and stored, a very key piece of the foundation. You know, you think the automation is going to make a lot of decisions, but it's kind of a dumb machine, to be honest with you. Even with AI, it's not going to get that smart. So you have to feed it good information. So you figure out which products I'm going to put there, how I'm going to slot it based on what cube and weight information, when I'm going to process it, when I'm going to kick it out of the automation to put it somewhere else in the warehouse, put it, you know, way in the back, when I'm going to move it to a faster processing area because it's too fast for automation, right? I mean, there's a lot of stuff that if it's fast moving, don't put it in against the person. It's too fast, right? So how do I make those decisions? And then how do I create transparency for the customer? Think about the customer experience. I mean, it's interesting, you know, in Beijing, you go and you order a sandwich. There's an app, you can order a sandwich, and they'll tell you who is making your sandwich. And they tell you exactly within plus or minus 30 seconds when it's going to be done, and when it's done, who finished it, who wrapped it, who's on a scooter to bring it to you, and when you're going to get it. Like, that's a sandwich shop in Beijing, right? You can do it. They have a data architecture. And I realize it's a little more simple in some of your businesses, but that's kind of the way you think about it. So if I have that common architecture, and then I have good information against that using BI tools, again, very simple stuff, then I can start making decisions. And if I compress the time of my cycle time, then I can adjust, right? I can react. And that's really the whole concept of end-to-end. I can adjust to my demand concepts. So we got a couple case studies, but I think what I wanted to kind of highlight here is the best, you know, we work with a lot of different companies. And, you know, it's like anything else. Some of our clients are just amazing, like, they impress me. And I'll be honest with you, like if it's a retail company, you go in the store, you're like, wow. You go in the DC, you're like, wow. You go in their headquarters, you're like, wow. And guess what? They got great data architecture. They have a defined customer experience, and their entire company is designed around that, right? And I have clients that are not like that. You go in a warehouse, you're like, holy crap, you still have this warehouse running? This system that you should have sunsetted 20 years ago, and you know, you got high turnover all over the place. Yeah, you see that too. But what's good is we learn from all those clients. We give them, you know, from a consulting perspective, our job is to not copy paste anything. I actually abhor that approach. But what we do is we work directly with them. And so we do have a number of clients we worked with specifically around how to resolve some of their challenges. What we find on the retail side and the manufacturing side is that they have way too many SKUs. They make money, you know, this particular client makes money on about 10% of their SKUs that they sell. If you do the math, 10%. Okay, what do we do with the other 90? Well, you still have to have them. It's part of their strategy. So then how do we create more efficiency for the other 90%? So for this particular client, you know, we did a lot of things, but one of the things we did was we designed a multi-echelon. They were a flat supply chain, I say it. They didn't have echelons. We designed echelons in their supply chain, which cut a lot of costs and kept those SKUs close to the customer, but in a more, I would say more concentrated, centralized areas, right? So put centralized distribution centers with high SKU counts. Guess what? Perfect locations for automation, right? You got a lot of SKUs where you got to pick in the air. You don't have a lot of volume in those. Automate those things. And guess what we did? It sped the whole machine up, which means I can get those long tail SKUs to a store pretty fast. Completely changed the customer experience. That client is gaining market share on the competition like crazy. It's also a very well-run company. But we also design the distribution centers, right? We designed specifically, in the multi-echelon environment, they got forward replenishment DCs like everybody does. And those are very well run. Then we designed the automated, more centralized, with longer tail DCs, and we design import centers. All of those have completely different types of automation and concepts behind them, but are tailored to specifically what they need. We also work with some of the competitors, and those concepts I talked about would not help them at all, because they're completely different. Like, so you have to really customize this stuff and think about how you want to do it with them. We got some great payback in this case. Normally, we find tremendous payback in every client, because if you actually do that end-to-end concept, take a look from the customer experience backward, it's a win-win-win, right? I get a better customer experience, I get lower costs, you get tighter cycle times, better inventory positioning, and that happened in this particular situation. So we also do a lot of work just inside of facilities. When you take a look at facilities, most people call us when they're running out of space, and most of the time they're running out of space because they didn't design the existing distribution center well enough, and they're wasting space, right? Which everybody does. That's the way it is, right? You waste space in your house, you waste space in DC. It's the way it works. So, but in this case, it's one of the things where, on their wholesale side, we kind of had to redesign what they had, and kind of keep up with what their growth was going to look like. And again, came up with a very customized mix of automation. They had some very legacy systems, things that normally wouldn't be able to integrate well, so we had to have some slight different integration tools. But hey, look, all the technology's out there. Whatever you need to kind of help you automate, it's out there. If you need different integration points, it doesn't matter what you have. It's all out there. Just find the puzzle pieces you have. We designed these puzzle pieces for them. And gave them a, it was a 4-year payback, but you kind of see labor reduction. There was 250 FTEs. I mean, that's a pretty dramatic, that's a big deal, because imagine trying to maintain those 250 people, trained, temps, turnover, human cap, like it was kind of a big deal to them. And I think it's great that companies hire employees and pay good wages. Like, I'm a big advocate of that. But when you kind of get down to it, a lot of times, I got clients with 2,000 folks in a warehouse. It's unmanageable. Like, there's a certain level by which you don't want to go above. It's hard to source, get good talent, maintain a consistent team, have good quality of work environment for them. So that's what kind of happened here. So kind of in summary, we see great ROI in the right application. We do normally, if you think about your supply chain, are you going to automate everywhere? No. Are you going to automate in places where you got a lot of density of SKUs and potential volume? Absolutely. And basically the way the automation trend is going, you're going to automate a lot more than you think, because the costs are going to keep going down, and labor is going to keep going up in costs and difficult to available. So that's basically the future. Any questions? Yes, sir?
What percentage of your customers are asking for more advanced capabilities like AI, cloud-based solutions? Is it a small percentage or larger?
All of them. Everybody above about $200 million. Yeah, all of them are. The one thing that COVID did is it highlighted that the technology stacks of most companies were not adaptable to deal with the changes in supply and demand. Like, the planning forecasting wasn't adapting. Their systems, they couldn't update. Always call SAP as code for Excel, right? It's not very dynamic to update. Where's my product? How's it works? So it's one of the things you kind of have to dig into. How to upgrade the entire thing. So we do see a big wave of investment in that. Yes, sir. Mr. Kendall.
Thanks, Nate. Are you seeing a scale at which automation doesn't pay off? Is there sort of a minimum scale you go, yep, it makes sense above this, but below this, keep it manual?
Good question. Is there a scale by which automation doesn't really apply much? I would say today, warehouses that are less than 200,000 square feet and less than 50 associates, it's going to be hard to make an ROI against it. We normally see it more appropriate somewhere around 400,000 square feet and 100 associates. It starts to make more sense. But again, if you think about that end to end, sometimes you want to you may want to concentrate your DC. Maybe you got a bunch of small ones, you want to concentrate to one, put automation, then bang, you're making money. Which, oh, by the way, is easier to manage inventory with 1 versus 3. So, yes, sir?
What percentage of your clients are 2B customers and what percentage are 2C customers? And do you see any difference between the 2B and 2C clients?
Yeah, excellent question. So we only work mostly in the consumer and some industrial B2B space. Half of our clients are retail or sell directly to customers, and half of them are manufacturers or wholesalers that sell to companies. So it's kind of weird. We're a little half and half on that side. And the differences we see are, the differences we see is that the folks who are in the retail are doing really well. They have a very well-defined customer experience, and they kind of work way backward to try to figure out how to do that. And like GameStop was an interesting one we worked on. When they were doing their stock run-up and the whole thing, we were designing that experience. So they're a little more defined. The manufacturers and wholesalers, a lot of times, they don't have a good defined customer experience. A lot of times they do that. They're like, we're just going to make a bunch of stuff and get it there at a high service level. It's like, no, you're not. You can't get everything there at 99%. It doesn't work that way. Some of the SKUs, you can't, your factory cannot run low volume SKUs at a rate to kind of maintain those service levels. So you got to trade off. And how are you going to figure that out? And you got to define that experience. That's one of the biggest differences. I will tell you, though, that multi-echelon end-to-end works in both situations. It actually applies to both areas. And our analysis, I mean, it's kind of a dark secret. Our analysis for a retail company or manufacturing company is not much different. Yeah, it applies both ways. We're out of time. Thanks for coming. I hope you all enjoy the show, and we'll see you over at the Invista booth. We're right over there.